What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back, everyone. This is Lee, and yes, today's the day we'll be talking about the Nikon ZF versus the Nikon Z6II. So, with all that said, let's begin. So the Nikon Z6II versus the Nikon ZF. Let's first off talk about price. Now the Nikon Z6II will run you roughly around 1600 USD. The Nikon ZF will run you roughly around 2000 USD. So that is a $400 price difference between the Z6II and the ZF. So that means throughout this entire video, you guys need to decide if that $400 extra is worth it to you from the Z6II to the ZF. So let's take a look at some quick specs. Now the Nikon Z6II, you guys have seen this slide many times if you guys have been following my channel. It's a 24 megapixel full frame sensor, BSI, 14 frames per second, dual XP6. And the reason why you're seeing dual XP6 is because the XP6 on the Nikon Z6I was quite slow. So that's what they end up doing with this model right here. They made a dual XP6. And also this came out roughly around 2020, which was an interesting year. Now let's take a look at the Nikon ZF. And as for Nikon ZF, it's more or less the same like the Z6II. At the beginning is a 24 megapixel BSI CMOS sensor, is 14 frames per second. However, this is XP7 over the dual XP6. This camera came out roughly around 2023, and it also features a picture shift mode where you could shoot a 96 megapixel high-res image. And here are some shutter specs. And let's take a look at some video. Now as for video, the Nikon Z6II only does 8-bit internal in the camera. However, you could pay Nikon $200 and get your camera sent in. This goes for Nikon Z6I, Z6II, Z7, Z7II. You could get it sent in to get it upgraded so you could use an external monitor to get ProRes recording for video. Now, for the Nikon ZF, you could definitely do 10-bit internal, unlike the Nikon Z6II. You could shoot SDR, HLG, and N-Log in your system. Now, since we are talking about video, let's take a quick look at some autofocus tests. Now, here is the video autofocus in low light. I can definitely tell you guys that the Nikon ZF does way better than the Nikon Z6II. You get eye tracking and darkness. That is pretty awesome. Also, if you guys been following me on my Instagram, you guys saw what the Nikon ZF did to my R3. That was amazing, but we're talking about Z6II versus ZF here. So for those people that have been following me, hopefully you guys enjoyed that live testing. Now, here is video autofocus in good light. And yeah, ZF does better than the Nikon Z6II. And keep in mind, I'm wearing glasses, I'm wearing a hat. I'm trying to trick the camera, and the ZF is more precise than the Z6II. Now, as for photo autofocus in bad lighting, the Nikon ZF seems to track my face throughout, whereas the Nikon Z6II seems to be out of order. It's not even working, it's not even tracking me, so that is pretty bad right there. Now, as for good lighting, the autofocus on the Nikon Z6II, you're getting more box tracking, whereas the Nikon ZF, you're getting a lot of eye tracking. So if you're shooting with 1.4, 1.8 lens, I would recommend the Nikon ZF because you can hit the eye precisely, whereas the Nikon Z6II, box tracking on the face is a gamble. It's going to shoot sporadically in that area. Now, with the autofocus testing out the way, let's take a look at the camera. Let's take a look at the back of the camera. Let's take a look at the EVF. The EVF looks like a 0.5 inch, 100% coverage. However, the ZF is sporting OLED panel, whereas the Nikon Z6II is sporting a quad VGA panel. So that is something for you guys to definitely take note of. Also, it's 3,690,000 dots on both systems. For the monitor, it's a 3.2 inch monitor. It's 2,100,000 dots. And also, if you take a look at the screen, the Nikon Z6II is sporting the tilting screen, but we call it the flip screen. But the ZF is sporting the vlog screen, right? That's what we call it, but it's the articulating screen. So there we go. And since we're talking about screens, let's take a look at the brightness of each screen. Now, the Nikon ZF has been used for 1 year almost. It's 717 fire candles, and the Nikon Z6II is 695 fire candles, and it has been used up to 3+ years. So just keep that in mind. Now, as for the top of the camera, as you can see, it's very different. The Nikon ZF is emulating a film camera, which I believe I have. One moment, I just realized I have it. Now, here is a Nikon FM2 right here, and here is the Nikon ZF, and it said that this is supposedly mimicking the Nikon FM2. And by the way, the dials right here, these are brass dials, so over time, it's going to brass up just like this, as you can see. can see some of the brassing happening on my film camera right here. That's because I've been using this for quite a bit. But over time, you'll experience the same thing on your ZF, on your dials. However, on the top portion of the ZF, this is actually still magnesium alloy. This is not brass on top or the bottom, whereas the film camera, it is brass on the top and the bottom of the camera. So keep that in mind. Now, back to the video. And as for the Nikon Z6II, there's nothing fancy about the system itself. On the top, you get plastic dials and a magnesium alloy body, but I would have to say, for some reason, the ZF actually feels a little bit more sturdier than the Nikon Z6II. So just want to throw that out there. I always felt that, I don't know, I just feel like the Z6II, let me get the Z6II, be right back. I got the ZF right here, and I keep saying that the top portion is, I always felt like this is plastic, but this is magnesium alloy. Very different feeling. Just feel like a thicker metal. But that's just my opinion right there. But anyways, and as for the bottom of the camera, I would have to say that the tripod mount, if you're using Manfrotto for the Nikon ZF, it's going to be a nightmare. Let me show you guys why. Once you put your Manfrotto plate at the bottom, the battery is kind of, you need to take off your plate pretty much. You cannot take out the battery without this happening right here. So just want to point that out there. ZF, on Z6II, you don't have any of that issue here, but for the ZF, you will have the issues here. So you might need to invest on a Arca Swiss plate. So for the Arca Swiss plate right here, as you can see, now I could do that. Now, as for the side of the cameras, they both sport USB-C. The Nikon ZF is sporting a micro HDMI, whereas the Nikon Z6II is sporting a mini HDMI. And also you get your mic plug jack right there and your headphone jack as well. However, the Nikon Z6II do feature an accessory terminal. For me, I use that for a radio trigger. So here's the receiver and here is the trigger right here. But if you own the ZF, you need to buy the ML17s right here. If you've been watching my channel, you already know that I did own the Z50 at one point. So this worked out really well for the Z50. This is the ML17 from Nikon. So you need to get these remotes for the ZF. The ZF does not work with these radio triggers right here, so keep that in mind. Now, as for battery, they both use the same battery. It's the EN-EL15C. Now, for the Nikon Z6II, you are shooting up to 340 shots according to the CIPA. Of course, you're getting more than that, but for the Nikon ZF, you're shooting up to 380 shots, and of course, you're shooting more than that. And the 40-shot difference between the CIPA rating is basically the XP7 faster imaging processing, and we'll see that later on in the video. Now, as for storage, the Nikon Z6II do use the UHS 2 cards and also the CF Express card, whereas the Nikon ZF, they use a UHS 2 card and a micro SD card, which is very interesting in my opinion. And speaking about storage, let's take a look at the buffering. Now, for the Nikon Z6II, I'm using my fastest card, the Pro Grade card. And for the Nikon ZF, I'm also using my fastest UHS 2 card, the PNY X Pro 90. And here is the Nikon Z6II. And here is the Nikon ZF. Now, here is the audio level between both cameras, the ZF and Z6II. And if you take a look at the Z6II, you can see that gap right over there, whereas the ZF do not have this gap. But towards the end of the sequence, the ZF kind of tapers off, but the Z6II is capable of shooting a bit more towards the end. So in short, if you're looking for a camera with the most shots at the beginning of the sequence with no stopgap, ZF is the way to go. If you're looking for a camera that's going to be shooting a bit more shots, but you're okay with the gap in the middle, definitely Z6II will be the way to go. Now for this next test, this is the color science test. I'm using a 28mm for both cameras. I'm shooting outdoors on a cloudy day. And I will have to say, through the entire sequence of tests, I do notice that the Nikon ZF, it seems to be here and there slightly a tad teeny brighter than the Z6II. Not a big deal, not a big difference, but just want to point that out. You could definitely edit that in post. I don't think anyone will really notice unless you're pixel peeping like I am, but I don't see a huge difference. So I'm going to say that they're more or less the same, but if you're pixel peeping, you could definitely tell that it's just a tad brighter on the ZF. Now as for the ISO test, I do notice that throughout the entire range that the Nikon ZF is slightly brighter than the Nikon Z6II, which explains what we saw in the previous test when we look at the color signs. It is just a tad bit more slightly brighter on the Nikon ZF over the Z6II. However, with the noise level, it looks more or less the same, but with the tad slight brightness on the Nikon ZF, it does look less noisy on it. But leave your comments down below, let me know what you guys think. As for the next test, this is the dynamic range test. This is where I underexpose my shots and I pull out the exposure, and this is what I got. Now, throughout the entire range, I will have to say that the Nikon ZF do have better dynamic range over the Nikon Z6II, and that's for mechanical shutter. Now for electronic shutter, the story remains the same, no surprise here. The Nikon ZF dynamic range is better than the Nikon Z6II. So just wrap things up, Nikon Z6II versus Nikon ZF. At the end of the day, I'm going to say the same thing I said on my Instagram. So forgive me for those people that have been following my Instagram. I'm going to say the exact same thing. I thought that the ZF was a cosmetic upgrade from the Z6II. That's what I thought. Everything inside was going to be the same as the Z6II. After doing this test, it is totally different. This has better autofocus, right? Better dynamic range, better video, right? Better buffering, right? Better build, right? I did not expect that. The build, yes. Everything else, no. But for the Z6II, if there's anything I can say to persuade people for the Z6II, because I've been using the Z6II for 3+ years, this system has better grip. You can use a battery grip for this unit. Also, tripod plate placement is better than the ZF. And of course, my very favorite, the radio trigger accessory input right here. And that's it. So if you're shooting the exact same shot, exact same low light settings, the ZF is going to be a better choice than the Z6II, period, right? But if the shot has, adequate amount of light, then the image at the end, it's hard to differentiate then because they both shoot the same. But for difficult situations, the ZF is going to give you a better user experience than the Z6II. And yeah, there we go, right? But anyways, thank you guys for checking back. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely click like and subscribe. And I guess I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy. Peace.